Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the world, welcome to a time of mayhem. Welcome to a time of chaos. Welcome to one of the most precarious times in modern American history. And welcome to a conversation with a guy that I think is one of the smartest people in America, period. A guy I love reading everything he writes, listening to everything he puts out, and a guy that I thought was the perfect person to talk to right now as so many things explode and so much shit hits the fan. So without further ado, I'm very grateful and honored to have the great and powerful Jason Dempsey joining us today on Angry Americans. Welcome, my friend.
Hey man, it's great to be here. And I tell you, you kind of caught me out of the blue. I generally don't think I'm, hanging out in the stratosphere. And I sincerely appreciate the diversity of voices you've been able to bring in to talk about, the cluster that's ongoing in America.
So there's a lot of cluster to talk about. Before we get to that, I want to ask you a question I've been asking everybody. Pandemic is still raging. Where in America are you? And how are you and the people close to you?
Hey man, it is, I'm doing very well. I've got a house over my head. I'm in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. I've got a high school and a middle schooler in the house. We're safe. We're healthy. I'm not worried about my job. I'm not worried about my health care. So no matter what else is going on, I know I've got it better than, a good 80% of folks out there. So grateful to be here.
I think that's the kind of perspective I expected to hear from you. We're going to talk about, a lot of complicated and dynamic stuff, but I also want to talk about some important and maybe equally complicated, but less celebrated stuff. You have a lot of experience as a combat leader at the highest political levels as an academic. Can you talk about being a dad right now? We talked about this as we were warming up, like right over me now, my kids are running around. It sounds like a fucking track meet. I have it for folks that are watching on video. This is my I give no fucks background now because I've stopped trying to play the room raider game. I'm not going to be room shamed. And I'm, we're all just trying to keep it together, right? And keep moving and keep doing stuff. But you're a guy who's really good at doing stuff in chaos. And I got to imagine that includes leading your family too. So what's that like for you, and any insights, man?
For one, man, I am exceptionally grateful not to have toddlers. Like I said, my kids are, 17 and 13. They're both self-sufficient. Both of them are studying right here in the house right now. My son just walked by, but he caught himself and was at least semi, not the usual teenager clumping through the room. They're both doing great. And again, it's just another thing I'm grateful for, because I cannot imagine, right, trying to homeschool kids right now. I'm grateful we live in a great school district. They're trying their best. Hats off to every teacher in America right now. I am a little bit disappointed. My son he is starting his senior year. So I'm, trying to figure out what that means to be a senior in the middle of a pandemic, and how to make it a special year for him versus, a downer as he launches into life. So, again, could be a lot worse, but we're dealing.
Excellent. We are all dealing. Part of how we deal is, exercise, meditation, and occasional adult beverage. So I will ask you, Jason Dempsey, the question I ask of all our guests: what is your drink of choice?
Hey, well, so for one, we're in the golden age of beer right now. At least we were, right? A lot of small breweries are struggling. Right now, my favorite is right there in Brooklyn, Other Half Brewery, a bunch of New York folks putting out some great stuff. I know that they're having tough times, without having a tap room open. I promise, to them and everybody, I'm doing my darndest within the limits of what my health can sustain, to keep them alive through the pandemic. But that's my go-to beer at the moment.
Excellent. Do they have what kind of beer is it?
They make a lot of hazy IPAs, so they're, I'm on that boat. I resisted for a while, but yeah, they make some great IPAs.
Excellent. Well, I'm always happy to give a shout out to anything happening in Brooklyn. I want to ask you, because some folks are watching this on our YouTube channel or online, and most folks are listening, but you've got an interesting print behind you that I want to know what that is, because I got to imagine it has some meaning and maybe a story. So what's over your shoulder on the wall?
Yeah, so it was either this one. On my other wall, I've got both. It's an original World War I poster. On my other wall, I've got an original Uncle Sam, I Want You, because I've always just been fascinated, right, by the intersection between war, propaganda, and how you mobilize population. I think that this thing right here is great, and as I was sitting down in front of it, I was like, well, it definitely represents a different time. This is a poster for the French Liberation Loan, where they're raising money for the war, and it shows, the United flags fighting against the Kaiser. So missing a couple things. We think everything's getting better, but this represents a bit of unity and some coalition cooperation in the face of evil that we're kind of missing right now. And it also is a hell of a reminder that at one point people and citizens were expected to contribute to war, or they're expected to at least pay something versus putting it on credit card for our kids. So that's this poster.
I love any Jason Dempsey story about anything. So I knew there would be a good one behind it. If you want to see what that looks like, check us out on YouTube or on the angryamericans.us website. Jason, before we go deeper into the civil military relations, everything going on with the president and our national security, you grew up traveling different places. Your dad was in the military, and I know you bounced around a bit. But the other question I ask of all of our guests, Jason Dempsey, when you were growing up, Jason Dempsey, what was your first car?
Well, I was given a hand-me-down Mazda 626 gray, and we thought, when we bought it, I thought it was the height of luxury because we'd never had a car with, power windows before. So it was pretty spectacular. I guess I've since upgraded. I've got a 1968 Cadillac DeVille in my garage that, I got to get running again. And maybe if my son learns to drive safely, I'll let him take it out his senior year. We'll see.
Wow. I want to go back to the 626. What year was it and what color was it?
Oh, Jesus. It was 1980s. We probably bought it in 86, 87. And it was that faded 1980s gray that just kind of gave up and wasn't even trying to be a color.
Excellent. And the Cadillac? I mean, what's
Cadillac is black.
You can.
It's a white soft top on shiny black.
Ooh.
It sounds and smells like victory. And if you look at the hood, you can see all of America.
I just got a Cadillac, and I'm excited about it. It's a newer Cadillac, but it was always my grandfather's dream car. He never got a Cadillac. He came here with nothing and was a part of the World War II generation. And he used to have an Oldsmobile, and he used to say proudly, "It's as big as a Cadillac."
Which is hard because Cadillacs are huge.
Right.
Yeah, no, definitely a piece of the dream.
So the dream all around us is fragmented. It's disjointed. It's being twisted. There's a lot of this I want to dig into with you. I mentioned as we were warming up, if folks haven't heard the Serial podcast about Bo Bergdahl, I thought that you were the best part of it. I think that there were some highlights. I think it wandered at times, but you were this guy I wanted to hear more of because you were the connective tissue in helping, I think, folks understand what it all meant beyond the politics and the media sensation. What does it mean? You're a great guy to help us understand what it all means, right? Whether it's a Cadillac, parenting, or that print behind you. So I want to start with kind of a big question. You're a strategic thinker. You've worked in the White House. You've been a combat leader. How do you evaluate this moment in history, where we are, and where the country is right now?
That's a heck of a question, man. And I think historic analogies are always fraught, right? Because there's a very special kind of social engineering that many on the right like to grab onto. They avoid the idea of social engineering by saying we just need to return to a simpler time. And of course, that's the idea of that simpler time even exists is just as much a fantasy as some raging progressives' idea of a utopia in the future. So flashes back to the past are always fraught. But what I'd say is the more we look at things like the 18 pandemic, we look at the previous bouts of influenza, we never did that great. We always struggled. There were anti-maskers. There was employers taking advantage of, sick workers. We've never done that great. Where I would say where we are here, and what is most annoying and infuriating about this is that we've become ahistorical to a degree, right? We think we're so goddamn unique and so special that nobody can teach us anything, and we don't need to look at history. We don't need to acknowledge, it's an insult to acknowledge failure or shortcoming. And that's exceptionally dangerous because it just means you're not going to get any better. So that's a long, meandering way of saying, I wouldn't necessarily compare this historically. I'd say we're especially hurting here because we've given up on the lessons of history, and we're so fragile in our understanding and in our commitment to what this American experiment means that even acknowledging that we're less than perfect sets a lot of people off, and it prevents us from getting better.
I want to go deeper on some issues, but what's your projection for the future? I mean, you're good at kind of seeing the future. You understand the past. I think that some of the folks I've had on this show have been really insightful in helping people expect or helping them prepare for what the future could look like. This is another big question, but how do you see the election unfolding? Potential violence afterward. What's the next 6 months look like to you?
It's a mess, man, and it's only going to get worse. We have a media and a public, right? So for one, there's obviously a bunch of intermediate steps of, how do we get to the election, right? And then what does that election look like? My immediate concern is we have a public and a media industry that is only built for one-day elections, right? You're going to see all these folks with their maps up, and they're going to want to declare a damn winner instead of educating everybody before then to say, hey, we're not going to have a winner on election night, right? And you and I are old enough to remember the 2000 election and how important, right, some of that initial messaging can be about who's the predicted winner, who's not. My hope, and I know it's probably not going to come true, my hope would that the media would just shut the fuck up on election night and, report what they can, but caveat and educate and explain that this is going to be a 2, 3, 4, 5 week ordeal. And the more we tee up narratives of, winners and losers in the horse race aspect of it, the more we're going to see a little bit of violence. There will be violence either way, no matter who is declared the victor. And the question is, how do we react to that? How do local and national leaders respond? And it's going to be a time when people need to get off the sidelines, particularly those below the top. But, our senators, our representatives, our state AGs, our governors, all get involved and say, hey, we have a system by which we can count votes. And we need to keep the peace so that we get that through, and that violence isn't going to speed it up. Violence is just going to prolong the whole goddamn thing.
Can I ask you to go deeper on that? Because you're a guy who understands violence. You're a guy who's experienced it and administered it, right? Like we've been in that, and you've been in it much deeper than me. And and you've also seen the political implications and other pieces. I mean, there were these folks who were predicting what Iraq would look like before and after the invasion. I know that's fraught with risk, but when you think about the violence we are likely to see, what do you think that looks like?
So we do have, we've got both, we have organizations that are building up, are talking, the whole catastrophe of costumed role players who all showed up to defend Gettysburg, a month or two ago based on false reports. We have a bunch of people who are at their core are fundamentally insecure. And I don't say that as they are necessarily insecure people. All of us are facing a degree of insecurity with what's going on. And unfortunately, we've fetishized violence, we've fetishized the military, we've fetishized this idea that a gun somehow solves things. Everybody wants to be. When people are faced with a system they don't understand, when they're faced with the complexity of the world, the easiest thing to do is say, well, screw it. I can defend my house and I can pretend this is a zombie apocalypse, right? I can control everything within this little realm and it actually makes me feel better. The challenge is getting people, and this goes into the larger discussion about where we are as a country is, the center has collapsed. People have forgotten how to be citizens. And so they're looking for the easy button, right? This idea that if I just have a gun and I go shoot somebody, I can solve my problems. And I can make a statement about what I think America should be like that will then result in me getting what I want, versus understanding that once you unleash that violence, it's a nasty, nasty cycle and it never leads up. It only goes down, right? Things only get more chaotic. Things only get more desperate. Countries continue to fragment. And we lose both the rule of law, we lose the ability to compromise, we lose the ability to talk to each other, and we lose the ability to make moral judgments because it's all about who's standing next to me that's going to protect me with their weapon versus, oh, hey, how do we ensure that that schools are still open and that we have functioning water systems, right? Everybody wants to turn this into an apocalyptic battle, and we forgot how to do even the basics. So I don't know if that made any sense, but
it does. It does. I think what we're what we try to communicate. I know for our families and the people close to us, a lot of us who've been in the military or been in law enforcement or even been in government are probably having these conversations where civilian friend or family member X pulls us on the side and says, hey, this stuff. How bad is it going to get? Right. And people are making judgment calls, right? Do I leave a city? Do I go to a school? Do I buy a gun? Right. Like these are decisions that people are making right now. And I don't think it's something the media is actually covering. I don't think we're having a thoughtful conversation about even the data around what's changing. So, I'm watching that closely. Right. And some of it has been exaggerated, but there are also signs of what looks sort of like an insurgency, right? I mean, we've seen this in other places, and how we reacted in Iraq determined whether or not the insurgency grew or was eliminated or was incorporated. And now those same types of leadership decisions will likely determine, to what extent the violence continues and grows. Yeah. So I want to pivot into what's your area of expertise, the civil military divide. There are these conversations now where in some ways, the military is kind of fighting back. I've said that some of the guardrails are pushing back. I wish they pushed back sooner. I wish they pushed back harder. You are an expert in this area. I want to focus specifically on, Mattis and Kelly, right? Mattis and Kelly were in uniform. They took off the uniform, took political positions inside the administration. They were next to Trump. Now they're out. And I think many people have been hoping they will spill the beans. Right, that they will be the ones who are in next to him that have more credibility than anyone else. They're also white men, right? They're the generals, right? Trump ran on my generals, and then the two of them and McMaster's are now out and potentially in an adversarial position with Trump. So you've written about this. Can you break that down from your standpoint? what, and maybe answer a really specific question. What do you think their responsibility is?
Yeah. No, that's kind of the crux of what's going on. So for one, these guys are in this on the idea because everybody's looking for a hero, right? Everybody's like, the military's gonna save us. And I will say that their actions, I think they've justified them to themselves in the short term, but in the process, they've undercut the very institutions that they purported to spend their lives defending. And to be very specific on that, right? So for one, let's take John Kelly, right? As soon as John Kelly took off the uniform, one of his first interviews that I mentioned, he's like, yeah, domestic politics is just a complete cesspool. Stay out of that shit. And think about that, right? This guy just spent 40 years of his life ostensibly defending the Constitution of the United States of America and our political system because it's the best thing going. And his attitude was, fuck that cesspool. What the fuck, right? It won't, but it should be. It absolutely should be a means by which, the professional military educators within the Marine Corps, the people who kind of husband, how the Marine Corps views itself, how Marine leaders, and it's not obviously specific just to the Marine Corps, but all the military, should say, what in God's name, right, are we teaching and promoting such that somebody who's ostensibly positioned to defend democracy looks down his nose upon it? So that's kind of the first issue. Then you've got both him and Mattis walking into this administration and the way they came in, right? There's a reason, and there's, this goes back to your question about history. People with a lot of experience with generals and fighting world wars and trying to figure out, well, what does it mean to stabilize the system post-World War? They knew and had very good reasons to keep generals out of these appointed political positions, right? They knew that there were some lines that should not be blurred. We all made an exception in this case. We said, well, man, Mattis is going to save us, right? He's going to step in and be our knight in shining armor. And I think he did the opposite, right? And I think he had a very immature view of his potential role in a democracy, right? General Mattis stepped in and agreed to be Secretary of Defense, not as a secretary, but as a general. And both him and Kelly clinging to this general identity. Again, it's an insult, right, to cling to your general identity after you've been a secretary, right? Because in a political system, ostensibly, the secretary is the senior role, right? It's what, it's the pinnacle of democratic, or near the pinnacle of democratic leadership. And to say, this secretary job, this is bullshit. So anyway, Mattis walks in and says, well, I'm keeping my uniform on, symbolically. Mm-hmm. And he acted like a general who'd just been kind of thrown in at the last minute, which he was. Mattis brought his general identity into the Office of Secretary of Defense when what America needed most was a Secretary of Defense. And so both these guys then, what they want as they've clung to their general identity is they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to be able to say, hey, man, I was just there to keep shit in check. I prevented democracy from blowing up, right? Everybody bow down and thank me. It's like, dude, actually, no, right? Trump brought you in and he used you. And you willingly turned over the prestige of your rank and of the military writ large to this guy. That was your choice, right? And I think these guys bought time for this administration to continue to consolidate, right? To wear down opposition. Right? Who's going to argue against, right, an incoherent foreign policy like, well, shit, Mattis is there, so maybe there's some coherence to it, right? Maybe it's not as batshit as it sounds, right? Maybe there's a vision there. When in a democracy, you need open and sustained debates and dissent. And by inserting themselves in there as officers, they shut a lot of that down. And now, of course, it's the worst for both of them to say, oh, I'm just, shucks, I'm just a general. Who am I to talk about politics? Like, dude, I won't say it. It's like, man, come on. Understand your role. Don't hide behind your rank. be a leader.
Jason, I want to jump in and ask you. You're saying what needs to be said. I've said this. Others have said this. But I feel like it's like now is the point where it has to crack through. I mean, nobody will call Mattis an enabler. No one will call Kelly an enabler, right? And they have hid behind the uniform, hid behind the general title, which, you've been in Democrat administrations, General Shinseki was put out at VA because they love generals and it looks good, and the optics, right? We've seen this before time and time again. But, for Mattis and Kelly specifically to say, it's a cesspool. He was in the cesspool. He jumped in the cesspool, and then he doesn't want to be in the cesspool, right?
Yeah.
And now, I think that I think they have enabled this guy. They've helped him make it worse. They've allowed him to politicize the military in a way we've never seen. And then now we wake up every morning hoping that they'll come riding in to save us. And they're compromised, in my opinion. Yeah. But, there is still a hope that we're going to wake up and there'll be a press conference with McMaster's and Mattis and Kelly standing side by side saying, we think he needs to go. Do you think that'll happen?
No. And I, at this point, for one, they gave him enough time that, even Mattis has spoken out a little bit, but he's no longer in the position, so folks aren't necessarily going to pay much, attention to him. He had the chance, he wrote a book, walked around bashing every Democrat he ever worked for. And it's like, I can't criticize presidents. I can't do this. It's like, dude, no, just admit you're a partisan. Admit that you clearly agree with most of Trump's agenda. And you see that just you agree with the general direction. You're just trying to, affect it on the margins versus saying, hey, no, I disagree with where this guy is going fundamentally, and I'm here to work directly against him in a political manner, right? That's cool. Go ahead, do that, man. Be a politician, right? That's actually your responsibility as a citizen at this point, right? Not to wait. And I think what's dangerous is everybody saying, man, I wish these guys would come out as military leaders and condemn him. That's the last thing, right? We don't want military leaders to come out and condemn anybody, Democrat or Republican. The military, for the most part, needs to stay the hell out of it. But again, these guys try to have their cake and eat it too. And so now whenever there's criticism or whether they're being taken to the mat on something, they want to put the uniform back on and say, I shouldn't get involved in politics. Like, no, man, own it. That ship sailed. Go for it. Relatedly, just so there's no confusion.
If we play this out forward, right? Now there are these controversial pieces being written by Nagel and others, right? About what happens if Trump won't leave office. So I'm not going to ask you about, what may or may not happen, but let's play this out. You worked in the White House for the president. You stood up joining forces. I think that might have been how we first met. You were still in uniform at the time, at a time when we had a group of people in the White House that were focused on a lot of this civil military relations stuff, right?
Yeah.
And how to get the White House involved. But you've been there. If Trump does not leave office and he has lost the election, in your view, as an expert on America, how should he be removed? And who should remove him?
In the most mundane way possible. It's like Secret Service can turn off all the blue badges. Just like, okay, hey, you want to hang on the house? All right. None of your staff can come in or out anymore because they're no longer legally allowed to be here. We've revoked all the passes. We revoked all the parking. No, you can't bring your car in. And then, there's no need to, he wants nothing more or would want nothing more than, this idea of people storming the gates and him being forcibly removed. Let him go out in, the humiliation of just bureaucratic processes wherein, hey, dude, no, you can't send anything to Congress because you're not legally authorized to do so. And you can sit there and pout for as long as you want, but the government's going to keep moving on. Right? Let all the Democrats move in, assuming there's it goes that way, let them all move in and start running agencies. I think this sense, the military shouldn't be solving any problems. It certainly shouldn't be involved in this one, right? And it's the same thing as like, hey, we need to arrest a drug dealer. Do we run into his house with guns blazing, or do we just have a plainclothes dude who waits for him to go shopping for bread and picks him up, outside the grocery store? There are ways to do it without making it a spectacle.
That's powerful. I mean, I think people are imagining this image of, Bob Mueller delivering a search warrant, pulling him out in handcuffs, right? But there is a powerful simplicity and probably the practicality of what you're describing. At some point, he and his people have to leave. And the idea of him trying to scan a badge that doesn't work to get back in the White House, it would be powerful and effective, right? And may actually be what has to happen. But let me ask you to drill down on something, because this time I think is different. At least we'll see where this goes. But this could be the biggest veterans military story of our time, because in my view, it may cost him the election. It may or may not. But this reporting from the Atlantic by Goldberg that he has called troops losers and suckers. There are multiple quotes now along those lines where he's disrespected service without the specifics of what he said, what he didn't say. We know who he is. I've said this is who he is. So whether or not we have an anonymous source or not, all the attacks on McCain and Khan and everyone else are out there and well established. Can you talk about what you think is happening right now in America around this, if it's landing, and what it means, not just for now, but for the future of the country?
It's, for one, I think, again, it ties into the symbolism, right? The military is the last institution standing. Nobody has confidence in nearly any other organization. And again, we can talk a lot about that, right? We're probably at peak military, for one. And I would submit that most of public confidence in the military is a facade. So it's something for people to easily get angry about, but it's fairly shallow in terms of how it's going to change people, who most of us have already made up our minds about, what this election is going to look like. Again, had some of this come out earlier, had people directly push back or refuse to serve because he had those attitudes, then I think that would have kept him in check better. Whereas now, right, it's why Congress is not going to do anything right now, right? There is no incentive for Lindsey Graham or anyone else to do anything this close to the election. No incentive whatsoever. So there's really nothing short of, I can't even imagine the circumstances, right? There's clearly no criteria by which a lot of these political leaders that have tied their fates to him, they're not going to suddenly come to their senses. With what's going on, I think there will be some softening. Again, just because, again, I've said most of confidence in the military is a bit of a facade, but there will be a softening of folks in the middle. The unknown question is this really an election about the middle, or is it about activating the base? And I think it's probably mostly the latter. So that's a really long way of saying I'm not sure how much this is going to affect everything. But it does just highlight the really dysfunctional role the military plays in American public opinion.
Is there precedent, Jason, for the politicization of the military that he has capitalized on? I said he ran on the flag, shit on the flag, and now the flag to some extent is fighting back.
Yeah.
And to us it feels new. But you are an expert in history, and we, JFK ran as a PT boat commander. George Washington was a general, right? We've been here before, but the damage that may be inflicted right now on our national security, that's what I point to, right? I say our enemies are celebrating for him to be attacking his own generals out in the open in this media environment, to be threatening to remove a defense secretary that he installed. The refusal to confront our adversaries like Russia and others as they, I don't say meddle with our elections, they're attacking our elections, and all these other things are happening. number one, how much more vulnerable are we, right? Beyond the politics and whether or not this has landed, the overall disruption that the military apparatus is experiencing. And is there precedent for this as a student of history?
Well, so one of the, there's two real separate questions on, one is just the role of the military in politics over time. We're certainly in a unique time because, the military has this outsized reputation. The military is put on a pedestal and seen as, everything that's good about America. And again, even if people don't understand what the hell is going on with the military, right? And if I could, sideline a little rant here, right? When people say they love the military, right, let me be very clear. You can't say you love the military without knowing enough about the military to be critical of it, right? Because if you don't know enough about it to be critical of it, then your love of the military is no deeper than, a teenage boy's relationship with porn, right? It's this projecting a fantasy onto some glossy images of what you think love and intimacy is like that has nothing to do with reality. And a lot of Americans project onto the military what they think the military should be, or what they want it to be, right? They want to see it as, the patriots who agree with them. And so what's interesting here is by the military being brought front and center into these debates, you're going to see just how strong some of these attitudes and respect for the military is. Because as soon as, one thing we found, there's a lot of great civ mil scholars right now doing a lot of great research, Jim Golby, Heidi Urban, and others who, if the military, everybody's gonna say, I love the military, but then if somebody in the military says, well, I want to vote for Biden and or Trump, then the public's very easy to say, oh, well, the military's fucked up. They switch on the dime.
Right.
And so by bringing the military into these debates, I don't think, I think everybody's going to soften overall. They're going to be like, maybe the military is not what I thought it was. Not good for a whole host of reasons. And what I just described there, has several competing threads of things we can talk about. But, we're in a weird spot, to go back to your original question, historically, because, again, last institution standing, but not a lot of interaction with the military. So again, it's this kind of fantasy idea of the savior that's going to solve all of our problems, right? Not just foreign policy, but we want to bring it in and have it adjudicate domestic political disputes. To your more straightforward question, of course this is hurting us, right? Could anybody explain right now what our Syria strategy is? What's our Iraq strategy? What's our Afghanistan strategy? The president is simply not talking about these things. And if Esper and Milley are being jerked back and forth trying to figure out, A, do I have a job today? B, am I being used, for a publicity stunt, and how do I avoid that? That's time they're not spent thinking about, working on, right? How are we executing and engaging with all these conflicts abroad? So it's certainly, our eye is off the ball. We're isolated in the world, and everybody, for once, one of the saddest things I've seen is, people have regularly hated America, off and on. People dislike us, but this is probably one of the first times, at least in our lifetime, where foreigners look at America and have pity.
That's powerful. There's a lot to unpack there. I don't think there's a historical parallel that really fits, because we've never had so few serving so many for so long, right? So like all the other we had a draft or a threat of a draft or conscription or something else that wove it in. So the ability to politicize it is the opportunity to politicize it is greater than ever before, because they're so foreign, they're so disconnected. Let me ask you, Jason, you're an expert on the data, the demographics. What do you think people need to know about the military that they don't know? You've done extensive research on this. You're one of the foremost scholars in the country on it. What do you think they need to know?
The military is from America. It's a bunch of Americans. We should always celebrate the idea that there are Americans who step forward to serve. But that doesn't mean that they left everything else at the door, right? Members of the military do great things, but they also abuse drugs and abuse their spouses. Members of the military are willing to serve in Iraq and Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean, right, they have expertise on foreign affairs. We absolutely should celebrate this desire to serve, but also recognize one, when a veteran or a military officer starts expounding on things that aren't directly veteran or military related, my advice to everybody is always, if you ever catch yourself starting a phrase with "as a veteran," my polite request is please just shut the fuck up. Right? Don't want to hear it, man. Speak for yourself. Bring your veteran experience into conversations. Educate your fellow Americans about what it means to be a veteran, what you did, but don't pretend to speak for all veterans, and don't believe for a minute that your veteran status gives you a unique perspective. Because at some point, right, that subverts the very idea of service, right? To say, because I'm a veteran, you need to listen to me. It's like, actually, no, you were serving, the democratic system. So, again, that's a long way of saying that what people need to know about the military is it's your next door neighbor, with all the strengths and flaws, and they're trying to do good work. We don't always get there, but they're trying. So don't turn them into, recognize them for what they are, but don't turn them into superheroes or villains.
Yeah. You and I have watched this closely, and I try to describe this to folks, especially in this environment where veterans are thrown up because they're veterans. I've had people, when I ran IVA, I can't tell you how many times someone would call up and say, I need 20 veterans for X. Like I had a vending machine, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. You need 5 women with no right leg in Florida. Got it. Do, right? Yeah. But there's also now a sense of entitlement that we talk about, right, about where, every veteran being elevated on national security, and feeling that they should be elevated on national security and veterans policy is like every black person, acting like they were a freedom rider, right? I mean, like, every black person is not John Lewis, and every veteran is not, Max Cleland. They don't have the perspective and the depth of knowledge and even the credibility, right, that's necessary for some of these discussions. But it continues to be thrust forward. But let me ask you a pointed question that you've studied. What do you think the political makeup is of the military and the veterans community, which are different, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. And a lot of talk now about how they're going to vote. How do you think they're going to vote in this choice between Trump and Biden? If you had to
so there's a couple different dynamics, right? So for one, right, it's always an easy headline to say, one of the classic headlines that's annoyed me year after year after year is when somebody say, hey, veterans are voting this way. It's like, all right, stop. Because when you talk about the veteran population, as you noted, it used to be predominantly a World War II generation. Right now, the modal veteran, right, 1/3 of all veterans is a Vietnam vet. So, by the way, guess what? Yeah, a lot of dudes and predominantly white. So when somebody says, well, veterans are voting this way in this election, just say, hey, be upfront about it. You're talking about 60 to 70-year-old white men, right? And it doesn't make for a sexy headline. But hey, if you're going to, so when people hear veterans are voting this way, right, they need to keep that in mind. When it comes to the active force and, if you want to parse out the younger generation, veteran status or military status does not shape opinions as much as people think, right? People walk in inclined to be a Republican or inclined to be a Democrat, and that's kind of how their worldview forms. The active force in all of my studies, in terms of liberal and conservative self-identification, looks almost exactly like America, right? Just as many liberals, just as many conservatives, a lot of people who are just kind of in between, like, man, I don't know, particularly with a young population, but it largely looks like America. Where this has gotten interesting with this election is, academic geeks like myself will break stuff down, traditionally on the models of liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. But right now, neither of those two framings really mean anything, because populism and reactionary politics have kind of driven right through the middle. We're watching a fracturing of the Republican Party. You are seeing a lot of historically identified veterans who would historically identify as Republicans saying, okay, well, maybe not this particular version of the Republican Party, and it's going to be a few years before all this shakes out. And, what will the Republican Party be in 4 to 8 years? I don't know. I just know it's not going to be the Republican Party we grew up with. It's either all Trump and reactionary populism, or could potentially be some of what you're seeing out of the Lincoln Project. So anyway, yeah. So that's a long way of saying my models and what I've looked at in terms of how veterans and how young folks approach politics is, it used to be the younger you'd naturally be kind of more liberal to a degree. I think what some of what we're seeing is some older active officers are saying, you know what, this isn't good for national security. I believe in the systems and institutions I've been trained in, and that's where I think you see the military times break a little bit, right? Very senior careerist folks, but then also they're on top of a group of younger soldiers who are just as prone to kind of this wave of populism as anybody else.
Got it. So Jason, let's do maybe kind of a rapid fire on a couple of things, because I think you're an expert that I'm lucky to have here. Trump has announced, the Defense Department has announced a drawdown in Iraq, 1/3 of our troops coming down. They're making a big deal out of it. I don't think it's a big deal. Dropping down 2,200, leaving behind 3,200. You worked in the White House probably around the time that Obama had a celebratory ceremony in 2011, I think it was, announcing the end of the Iraq War. This feels very political to me, right? Yeah. At a time when Trump needs a win and he wants to deflect. And I don't think the Pentagon makes any announcements without him knowing about it. But, this week, the week of 9/11, they say, hey, by the way, we're bringing troops home from Iraq, which we're doing all the time. But that's my view. I think it's bullshit. I don't think the Iraqis think this is a drawdown. I don't think the American public even knows we have 5,000 troops there. But what's your quick breakdown of that? And potentially by the time this airs, there may be a similar announcement about Afghanistan before.
Yeah. I mean, there's simply no coherence. Right. There's no coherence in terms of, one of the things that's been interesting about the last 4 years is just a lot of this stuff's been on cruise control. And it's just kind of the day-to-day in and out of military planners kind of driving the train. This announcement, it's as worth anything else that's been stated about, our direction in Syria or Afghanistan over the last 3.5 years. Which means it's meaningless, right? There is no there. This guy's shown that, more than willing to just make an off-the-cuff statement, and then it's up to Esper and everybody else to try to figure out how do they backwards engineer. Oh, today we're taking the gloves off and we're fully in the fight. Oh, nope, wrong memo. Right. We're actually, this is the president who's getting us out of wars now today. So everybody act like that's the case. He's just throwing spaghetti on the wall. And unfortunately, not only does it lead people to doubt, any statement out of DOD, but it also it prevents public engagement. Right? I think one of the things that annoys both me and you is, a public that doesn't realize that we still have ongoing operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. But you can't blame the public for well, wait, I thought this guy got us out of all wars. Or wait, I thought this guy took the gloves off 3 years ago, and when he dropped, a really loud, obnoxious bomb that did jack all, I thought that was, when we declared victory. So, you gotta, I think for the most part, you can just ignore it as noise.
Let me ask you the question I do ask of all my guests. Jason Dempsey, what makes you angry?
All of this. And it ties into, I know we talked a lot today about a lot of different topics. The thing that makes me most angry is the general abdication of citizenship. Everybody wants to be angry. Everybody wants an instant solution, but nobody's willing to do the work. Right? I would say that, particularly with the boomer generation, America has turned into that, the 16-year-old who's been getting everything in life, but for their birthday, they're given a brand new blue Porsche. They throw an absolute fucking tantrum because, by God, I wanted a yellow Ferrari, right? And I'm gonna run away from home. Screw it, right? This isn't everything I ever wanted. Therefore, to hell with it all, burn it down. And that's kind of where we are in America right now. It's like, hey, this has never been easy, man. It's always required all hands on deck. It's required people to be engaged, right, in your local politics, in your unions, in your schools, on your school boards, on your local boards. Get off your ass and quit praying for Trump to come in and solve all your problems, or quit blaming Trump for all your problems, right? Be a goddamn citizen, right? That has an amazing amount of power and agency. That's American exceptionalism, is this idea that any of us have a right to a voice and the ability to use it and to get involved, whether that's the newest immigrant with no money or a billionaire, right? We've ceded a little bit too much, to other people wanting to solve our problems. So, and all that ties into why we're so angry about how the military is using this, because everybody wants the military to be their savior. It's like, guys, let the military fight people overseas, but they're doing that so that we can fix our own domestic problems. So yeah, be a citizen.
I love that. I love that. That's going to get replayed and passed around, I hope, because that's what I think many people need to hear right now, and especially right now. Jason, you've been inside the White House. You've worked, alongside President Obama and the First Lady. You've been a part of encouraging people to be citizens. You've been around, I know, Vice President Biden. I don't know if you've been around Trump personally or not, but I want to take people a little bit behind the curtain. What do you know about Biden that you can share? And what do you think other people should think about, and especially with regard to national security defense issues?
Yeah, two things. One, what you see is what you get, which is kind of refreshing, right? Everybody talks about Biden's age. He is long-winded. He loves to tell stories, but it's because he cares, right? He has a narrative and a view of the world. Not a narrative he's trying to impose on people. He's just trying to connect and trying to, share his stories, bring other people into the story. I haven't interacted with him a whole hell of a lot, only on a couple of occasions, and he seems, exceptionally genuine. And what I always tell people is, when you're at that level, it's really hard to fake it, or you get caught, as per what we see now with a lot of these folks. It's like you're going to get caught if you're being fake, right? If you're saying one thing about the pandemic, but you really believe another thing, it's coming out sooner or later, right? So one, I think Biden's very authentic. And two, and this was even true in the Obama White House, his kind of understated power was his institutional longevity. And a lot of people are like, oh, he's an insider. He's like, well, you know what? He knows how the system works and how it's supposed to work. And oh, by the way, this isn't about burn it all down or instantly, transform it into the Taj Mahal. It's about, hey, let's keep the goddamn lights running. You want people in government who know how to fulfill budgets, who understand the implications of, taking money out of this pot. Well, it's going to have repercussions over here. And so I think one, and as he's selling himself as a very steady hand. The other thing I would say is he was right about Afghanistan, or he was more right than anyone else. He was more right than George Bush. He was more right than Condi Rice. And, sadly, he was more right than where Obama ended up. This idea that, hey, we're not going to remake this thing. Now, you can argue over whether his particular version of CT Light was going to work. But I think he nailed it more than anyone else in terms of we don't need to be, look back at the last 10 years, right? Every prediction that the military made, every goal that Obama and his predecessors set, we've failed miserably. So, a lot of people ding him on foreign policy, but at least in that respect, hell, I'm willing to listen to him.
CT Light, counterterrorism light, right?
Yeah, that was kind of the option he's throwing out. Like, let's not try to remake Afghanistan. He said, I don't think we can do that. I don't think it's something we should try to do. But, we had a whole coterie of, saviors. At that point, it was in the form of, Petraeus rolling in saying, "Oh, no, man,
Yeah.
just give me 3 decades and several $1 trillion and I can reform Afghanistan."
Right.
And everybody thought, okay, well, that.
Right. And he wrote a piece too with one of my dearest mentors, a guy you may have met, Les Gelb, about what could happen in Iraq. And he basically said it's going to fall into 3 different states. Right. And everybody said that's so unlikely, or it's so radical. Like, there were a lot of the foreign policy and national defense issues that were grounded in experience. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's one of the things that's been most damaging about this administration is if you bring in so many outsiders, they don't know how to drive the car. Right? Like, they're the dog that caught the car and has to figure out how to drive it. Right. And they smash it into everything. And that's true whether it's the Department of Education or the VA or the Pentagon. And there's so many people who have no basic knowledge of how to operate what they're driving. Right. And I think we've seen that, maybe most acutely in places like the Pentagon or Homeland Security or in education. So I think I'm really glad you brought that up. I think it's a really, really important point. Let me shift and ask you a question I got to ask you that I ask everybody. You're a serious guy, man. You do some serious stuff and really important stuff, but you also keep a really steady hand and a balance. Jason Dempsey, what makes you happy?
Usually, man, it's just getting out and, well, we can't do it right now, but bike racing usually. It's a great outlet. It has nothing to do with foreign policy or veteran status. And, you get out there and you get in the mud and leave it all out there. Normally this would be the start of the race season. I'd be out racing with my son for the first time, in some of the same races, which I was really looking forward to. But again, I'm still able to ride my bike. I own a bike. I have the time and freedom to do that. So, especially grateful for that. So
awesome.
Enjoy beers and bike racing.
Awesome. Not at the same time. Or maybe at the same time.
Some of these races.
Right? Yeah. That's what it feels like in the Trump administration. A bunch of guys who drank too much beer and don't know how to ride bikes. But let me ask you, so it's 9/11 time. I've focused a lot on 9/11 on the show and 9/11 first responders. You have a powerful 9/11 story and experience. 2 questions, Jason. One, what's your 9/11 story? Where were you that day? And with all this time and perspective, whether it's somebody like us who experienced it, lived it, or maybe the kid who was born a week later.
Yeah, Jesus.
What do you want those folks to know about that now as we hit the 19th anniversary?
Yeah, it's stunning, really, right? It's kids who are graduating college today, or maybe 2, 3, 4 years old. They have no understanding of 9/11. So it's now a full generation past. I'll tell you, for me, I had just given up a company command out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, and rolled into New York City. And I remember, right, the New York Times Magazine that week was all about some heiress who'd gotten drunk in the Hamptons and backed into some people at a party. It was like, and I remember thinking, holy shit. I thought, Kuwait and everything else was important, but apparently I got to figure out where the fuck the Hamptons are and, what that is. And then so I'm sleeping there the morning of 9/11 and, no shame in my game. I was sleeping in. And father-in-law called up and was like, hey, a plane hit. I'm like, God damn it. Now I got to get out of bed. And, then everything rapidly unfolded. And obviously we've seen the aftermath of that. What's really disheartening, right? Because in those weeks after, the one thing we all remember, it was a good 7 days before anybody honked at each other again, right? It was shocking to hear a car honk again. And there was a sense of, okay, let's all just kind of take stock of what's going on, be there for each other and figure out, well, what does this mean about America's role in the world? And unfortunately, that then deviated and instead of taking stock of where we were, we had folks like Rumsfeld and Cheney who came in and brought pre-existing agendas into what our reaction was going to be. And we're still suffering from that. 19 years later, we're still suffering with the immaturity and the mendacity of how we approach that aftermath and what we use that tragedy for, and the opportunity. It's hard to say. With tragedy comes opportunity, and we shot it. Right, we wasted it. We threw it away, and went back to business as usual. So, what can we take now? I mean, if with the loss of 186,000 lives, I'm afraid we might not take stock of this either and figure out how to be better. I hope not, but anyway, that's.
I think whatever happens going forward, I hope that your voice is at the center of it. I know that if Biden's elected, you should get some phone calls, and I hope you're back inside the White House or back in a position that can help drive forward the future and remember those lessons. You are you're a conscience, man, and I think that especially in the weeks to come and days to come, it's going to be more important than ever. I think you and a small number of guys and gals like you represent the future of this country, and you can help us stay on the right path, or if you're not involved, we could go down a wrong path. So I hope you're intimately involved in whatever happens inside Washington in the next couple of years. I recommend that everybody read your book and read everything you write, listen to everything you say. You're a true patriot, man. And I'm careful about throwing that word around, but I think you help us understand what's good and what's not, and what we can do going forward. So I'm really grateful to have this conversation with you right now. I hope you'll come back. And before I leave you, I got some gifts. I'm going to give you rapid fire. Getting some Angry Americans gear made by veterans. You can ride it on your bike or use it to clean up some beer. You got some Uncle Nearest whiskey, best whiskey in America, small batch whiskey coming your way.
It's like half of it's gone, man. You've been hitting it this morning?
No, I haven't yet. That's funny. It is half drank. My stash is low because I've been sending it to all my guests.
All right.
But it's good stuff, and that's coming your way. You can drink it on your bike or whatever. And the last question I've got for you is kind of the Rorschach test of our show. Our listeners know this. Peeps are an American classic. Jason Dempsey, if you had to pick a color of Peeps, yellow, blue, or pink, which one would you pick and why?
It's a trick question because there's no flavor difference. So for one, when I was deployed, the book I'm most proudest of is in my limited spare time, I would stage peep battles in the talk and send the stories back to my son. So I'm a huge fan of peeps. I would say the pink ones look the best when you light them on fire. So I'd go with pink.
That is the best Peeps answer we've ever gotten.
I was not expecting the Peeps answer. I didn't follow all the way to the end on these. So
76 shows, and that is by far the best Peeps answer we've ever had. That's fantastic, man. Well, here's to many more Peeps battles and hopefully less things lighting on fire in this country. But
hey, man, thanks for all you do, and thanks for these conversations. I said anytime people are willing to sit and talk about the role of the military, the role of citizens, we need to have more of these conversations. And I'm exceptionally grateful that you're hosting them and that you're using your platform to get people to pay attention. And not necessarily come to an answer that I may agree with, but hell, come to an answer, man. So I appreciate you forcing those conversations. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, brother. Right back at you. Wish you all the best. And here's to lighting Peeps on fire, man. Stay frosty, my friend.
You too, brother.